I've never really been one for the Resistance series. The first title in the franchise was a clearly unfinished product cut down to meet the PS3's launch.
Ridge Racer!
A fairly by-the-numbers FPS that had its moments but really lacked any form of gripping narrative or innovative mechanics to really make it all that compelling. It felt more like a PS2 game from a design point of view, but considering its status as a launch title, that isn't too surprising. The second title, however, has no such excuse and somehow turned out much worse, chucking a bunch of modern FPS mechanics such as regenerating health and a 2-weapon limit into the mix, which did nothing but make a dull game even more tedious. This is why I was rather surprised to discover just how much I enjoyed Resistance 3. The developer Insomniac obviously took some time researching what didn't work about the previous title and managed to create a fairly compelling shooter with this third entry. The game uses a health pack system, offering more challenge to the combat and forcing the player to implement a higher degree of strategy. Much like the original title, the weapon system allows the protagonist to carry all his weapons at once and switch between them on the fly, which allows the combat to be a hell of a lot more diverse than most modern shooters. A leveling up mechanic was even added to the weapons, which, while being a little shallow in concept, still was another enticing reason to make use of my whole inventory in an attempt to see what all my weapons would turn into upon use. The graphical design was much more vibrant and diverse, the various backgrounds were made more open to accommodate multiple approaches, and possibly most importantly of all, the guns were finally made satisfying to use. I must say, shooting enemies in the previous two games felt like I was mowing down the hordes with butter. Resistance 3 manages to make each weapon feel powerful thanks to superior effects and crunchier impact. Resistance 3 was a great little title that I honestly can't say I didn't enjoy. But you know me, when I like something I start analysing it, and that's when I start seeing the flaws that stop a title from reaching true heights. So let's not delay any longer. What exactly is wrong with this game? Well, let's jump on in. As usual, spoilers abound from this point on. Let's start by talking about pacing. Resistance 3 operates on the common FPS trope of having each level of the game be split up with a very traditional level style setup. You finish a section, the game cuts to a loading screen, and then we appear at the next important event. While this approach worked fairly well in the previous two games with their more military mission by mission based progression, Resistance 3 depicts one continuous journey across the US that our new hero Joe Capelli must partake in. It's simply point A to point B, and splitting the game up like this now just feels rather unnatural. You want the player to feel like they're taking this journey with Joe, but instead it feels more like we're seeing the highlight reel. I think the game would have been served better with a progression system more akin to, say, the Half-Life series, with one continuous adventure where we see everything from beginning to end. The setup we have also adversely affects the story. The game is trying to tell a tragic tale of how Joe Capelli has to leave his family so he can venture on a suicide mission that may or may not stop the evil Chimera forces. The game tries to make us care about Capelli missing his family and how he's caught between wanting to be with them or trying to maybe make a better world for them. However, with the game constantly moving from cutscene to gameplay to new level, there really isn't all that much time to really develop the character. Something that might have been achieved with a more deliberate pace the Half-Life style could have offered. My question is why he doesn't talk during gameplay. This would have been the perfect time to develop him more, and yet the game slaps gaffer tape over his gob the second we get back in control. It's also rather hard to care about Capelli's family because, you know, we see them for about 5 minutes at the start of the game, so for all we care, Capelli might be seriously upset about missing his dog and cat. There are some really cool story moments, like when Capelli is running towards the last room of the game, and as he gets closer we hear a radio message sent by his wife wishing he was with her. With some more development, this could have been a real emotional scene, but as it stands, it just serves to make me wish the narrative had been better. The game is rather short. I beat it in one sitting, which might sound bad, but remember that even though the game is short, I would have never have sat through a game all at once if I wasn't enjoying myself. This short length really makes it hard for the story once again to become compelling. Before you know it, Capelli reaches the final area and the plot quickly has to resolve a way for Capelli to blow up the huge Chimera tower he was trying to get to. So the game has us climb up another tower, which we blow up, destroying our intended target in the process, which then is heavily implied in the credits to be the event that turned the conflict back in the favor of the humans, ultimately allowing us to win the war. This is nowhere near climactic enough for an ending to a trilogy. The final level is just like any other. Capelli fights his way to the end, kills some enemies, and boom, we win. Now, I'm not saying the game needed a final boss, but it did need something a little more meaningful to close off the series than just another fight with some random chimera. It's funny, the final level of Resistance 2 thematically is actually rather good. You and the last other soldier left make a ditch effort to board a Chimeran flagship with their last bomb. If they fail, the human race is over. You fight your way to the inner sanctum where you fight the Chimeran mastermind you've been tracking the whole game. Thanks to Chimeran infection, you become superpowered, allowing you to escape the ship just before it explodes. It's just a shame this level was in Resistance 2, so gameplay-wise it had tedious combat and a laughable excuse for a final boss. The final level in Resistance 3 is a lot better, but fails to thematically capture a climactic finale. Speaking of the ending to Resistance 2, whatever happened to that incoming evil that was foreshadowed?
This is just the beginning.
Feels like it was just sort of dropped. You know, that might have made for an interesting mechanic. What if the impending evil had been some sort of super chimera that you encounter patrolling destroyed America and then could have been a final boss? Just an idea. Instead, we get this silly little set piece in which Capelli dangles from the exploding tower as he shoots a bunch of enemies trying to take him down, which of course prompts Capelli's gun to suddenly gain the ability to not need reloading. It feels like all I'm really complaining about here is narrative and the ways it adversely affects my ability to care about the game's events. That's because this really is Resistance 3's problem. It has some great gameplay, but it lacks a compelling, well-paced set of events to really captivate me. For example, in the prison level, we encounter a grumpy fellow who has taken over the area and commands an army of prisoners. He killed your friend the professor, who once again falls just short of being a character we empathize with. Of course, our objective is now to track this guy down and kill him. He seems like just some random thug with no real compelling dynamics to him until...
They said you got kicked out of Circle. Me too. There ain't many of us left.
He says he used to be a member of the Counter-Chimera task force you were part of in the previous games. This is interesting. How did he go from there to becoming this evil thug who holds gladiator tournaments and has control over a conglomerate of criminals? We could draw some parallels here between the path he took and the one Capelli took after leaving the unit. We could be tackling how the same horrible situation can affect two different men. But of course he brings this up 2 seconds before we kill him off, which the game decides to represent not with a boss fight but with a lousy QuickTime event punctuated by the player shooting a bunch of explosive rounds into his head. Which would have maybe been cool if the game didn't then tell us which button to press to detonate these rounds we've been using throughout the entire game. But anyway, the point is, like everyone in this game, what could have been an interesting character ends up being nothing but another shallow NPC. So does Resistance 3 come recommended then? Well, I enjoyed the core gameplay, which was rather diverse and exciting for a modern FPS. If you can find it cheap, give it a go. You'll have an entertaining weekend, but you most likely won't be remembering much of the experience further down the line.
So here's this giant enemy crab. Attack its weak point for massive damage.